that we have, that we are careful to take good care of the time that we do have. It's very little class time, actual one-on-one class time, and the rest has to be done through questions and answers and responses in Google Classroom. So, but that said, I think that it's super important that you do tune in. I'm trying very hard to make the material that I present worth your while in a very short amount of time. So I hope you feel that way. I hope you feel like each one of the lectures provides something pithy and interesting that you can think about, maybe even something that challenges your way of thinking. That's my goal for today, which is my goal every day. And because I want to wrap up a little bit on the Odyssey and begin an introduction to Oedipus. The couple things I want to say, I just want to remind you that you have a paper due. So Elizabeth just joined us. Thank you. And I did get a lot of your work in, Elizabeth. I really appreciate that. So let me say a couple of things. First, I probably don't have to tell you this, but your first paper is due tonight at midnight. The only reason why I picked midnight is I had to pick a due date. And then it wanted me to pick a time, and I thought, well, we'll make it literally the end of the day. So midnight. I have already read probably a third of your paper. So if you would like me to take a look or take a second look at your paper, I'm happy to. I'm going to go home and spend a little time doing that. Some of you, though, are already close to done. And I really, really am excited at some of the things I've read. Some of your papers, I hope you don't mind, but I've just popped in anyway since it was available to me on Google Docs, and I read through it and offered some comments. And you'll know if I've read it because I will make comments. And if I haven't made comments, chances are I either just brush through it real quickly or I haven't seen it. So the past day or two has been busy, and so I haven't had the time that I would like, but I'm excited to do that. Chance to go through a few. I went through Faith's, which was wonderful. Stacy, you did a really good job. I really like what I'm reading from. Well, everyone has written something so far. I really like what I'm seeing. One question I have is, can you see other people's papers? Or can you only see your own? From the student perspective, can you see other people's papers? Because I would love to know that. Okay, so most people are saying that you can only see your own. And maybe that's better. There's a part of me that would love to have it so you could see others and kind of see how others are working and maybe even give each other feedback, but maybe that's for the best. But I will say that I appreciate that some of you have finally gotten the courage up to make comments on what people have posted in Google Classroom. For example, jumping over here, let me jump over here so you can see it. So jumping over here, for example, to some of the things that you've written about in the last lecture, which is about the Odyssey and the Underworld. And if you go in, you can actually, of course, click into it and you'll open it up and you can see other students' answers. And it's kind of nice. And you can then respond. And some of you have really taken that to heart. And I want you to know that I've noticed it and I appreciate it. And I appreciate how much that you have been very kind about it. I'm just going to throw out some names of people who've been doing that, and I hope you'll continue to do that. Melody, thank you. Melody's almost because Melody is an experienced teacher, and so I kind of gave her the green light to please help me to throw in comments, and she's great. She's quite an expert in some of these materials. I just really appreciate anything she says. And so she's been jumping in, adding some comments. A few others have done so. I noticed that Mark has, and I would love to see more of you do so, and more of you to look at what some of the others say, respond to them, comment on things that you agree with, because sometimes what they have to say is worthwhile. And oh shoot! And I accidentally hit the wrong button and rejected Marianne, so I need her to try again. So if anyone has access to her email or text, tell her to try again. I accidentally hit the wrong button and kicked her out. There she is. So sorry about that, Marianne. I think I accidentally bumped you out. Also, I want you to, of course, pay attention, noting that in my text, this is, of course, my wife's text here, so you can't see, but only about half of the class has responded to the lecture questions. You get points on these. These are points that you get. You don't get graded, but you just get points. And I hate to see people lose free points, points that you really can't get wrong. So please, and if the due date is passed, I'm going to say go ahead and post anyway. You'll get some points. I really want you to respond. It does two things. Probably the most important thing it does for me is it lets me know if anyone is actually paying attention to anything I'm saying. And the other thing is it allows me to see what's going on with your and your taking in of the material. There is a lecture question that is due on the 24th, I believe. Is lecture 4 was due on the 24th. And then you have another one that is due today. And so that was for question lecture questions number 3. If you haven't gotten that done, feel free to get that done. I'll give you some points for that. And that was the one going all the way back to where we were talking about Odysseus's cleverness. All right, any last questions before we get to what I would like to start talking about today? No? All right, well, I want to just say something a little bit about, how should I put it? One of the most familiar, perhaps the most familiar idea that you're going to run into in ancient literature, and it's not really just ancient Western literature, it's in contemporary literature. It's the concept of the femme fatale. And this is something I want you to know. Maybe use it in a sentence sometime when you're talking with your friends. They'll be really impressed. The femme fatale, which is really nothing more than Latin for the fatal female. If you prefer, the woman of death, the woman who brings death, or something a little less scary, the dangerous woman. It's the recurring trope of the dangerous female. This is something we've already seen showing up in the literature that we've read. So, as a matter of fact, this character, the femme fatale, is perhaps the single most recurring villain or heroine in literature. It's over and over again, we find the dangerous woman. She's got some very specific qualities about her. She is absolutely beautiful, seductive, and deadly. And of course, she will often lure the male in and be his demise. Exactly, Mark. Some of the best examples would be Delilah Delilah is a perfect example of the femme fatale. And over and over again, the James Bond franchise uses the femme fatale, this beautiful, sexy villain who is meant to lure him in, get him close so that she could ultimately destroy him. Well, we like to think that this is something that is cool and modern, but no, this is about as old as can be. As a matter of fact, we find it in the oldest work of literature, which we have not read in this class, which is Gilgamesh, which is 4,000 years old. I've given you a copy of it in the materials in Google Classroom, where you meet a femme fatale by the name of Shamat. She is a sacred temple girl. I'm just going to tell you it's the very first example of great literature and also the very first pornographic work. So I would say it's not safe to read to your children. It is definitely rated R, and it is thoroughly fascinating, where you have a wild man who's incredibly strong, almost like a Tarzan-like figure, who is hairy and naked and absolutely unbeatable. The woman comes, has sex with him for 7 straight days. And afterwards, the animals that all follow him can no longer handle him and handle his smell. He smells like a human now. So he goes back to Shamat. She teaches him how to use weapons, how to use tools, and how to be civilized. Because one of the recurring ideas of the femme fatale is that she will either destroy you or she will destroy you in a way, in that she will not necessarily kill you, but she will civilize you. That you will no longer be the wild man. Now, here are some examples of femme fatales that we are already very familiar with. Remember, she is the single most recurring villain heroine of literature, especially literature that's likely written by men. First of all, we have Eve. This here is an image. It's from one of the pre-Raphaelite painters. And you have a very sexy looking Eve, and she is taking the fruit from the snake. And of course, Adam over there seems oblivious. And she's already got that look like, I'm gonna pass this on to Adam, and he's not gonna be able to do anything because my charms are greater. And so right there, we already began to see in Genesis the very first model of the femme fatale, which will be all through the Bible. So now, some of you aren't familiar with this figure. This is a figure named Lilith. Now, Lilith, is not in the Bible. However, she is very much a part of Jewish tradition. Have any of you ever noticed, I don't know if you ever have, but Genesis has 2 very distinct creation stories in it. There's Genesis chapter 1, and Genesis chapter 1 begins with the very poetic, beautiful creation story. And it actually bleeds into Genesis chapter 2 to about verse 4. Then all of a sudden in verse 4 of Genesis, the text almost seems to catch its breath and start all over again and start the creation story all over again. And we get a second creation story. 2 things interesting about those 2 creation stories. One is the first one, God's name is simply Elohim. And the second one, God's name is Yahweh Elohim. This has led people to believe for quite some time now, and it's the dominant idea, that there are narrative strands in Genesis. But the ancient rabbis noticed that. So this isn't something new. The ancient rabbis before the time of Christ noticed that there were 2 creation stories in it. So that made them wonder, well, how is this possible? Now, the ancient rabbis, the Pharisees, the Sadducees, they studied the Bible very carefully, and they would write their own commentaries. Now, their commentaries are not anything like, say, the Seventh-day Adventist Bible Commentary or the New International Bible Commentary, where you almost go verse by verse or section by section, and you have some scholar give you a very scholarly commentary. This is what this text likely means. Well, the ancient rabbis didn't interpret that way. Their interpretations are more speculative. They actually will look at a story and they will add stories to try to help explain the stories. For example, they might say something like, well, we don't know for sure what happened, but it's possible that it happened like this. And then they would tell a possible story. Well, long before the time of Christ, there was a story that popped up in one of the Jewish commentaries. I believe it's in the Midrash, which is a commentary on the commentary, where they began to say, well, maybe there were two creations. Maybe God created twice. And the first woman in there who falls, perhaps that woman is Adam's first wife. Perhaps Adam actually had a first wife. And Adam rejected her because he didn't want to fall, and she was kicked out of Eden. And then God created him a second wife, who would be Eve. And that's why the ancient rabbis said, well, perhaps that's why Adam fell the second time, because this time he said, oh, I can't bear to watch my wife be taken out again. So this is not in the Bible. I'm just telling you right now, there is no Lilith in the Bible. Okay, she is not in the Bible. It's just a tradition that just kind of sneaked its way into the commentaries. And when she was kicked out of the garden, and during the years that Adam and Eve are living blissfully there, she becomes in many ways the mother of evil. So she comes out of the garden, and you can see she's a little bit of an unusual creature here in this picture. She's got bird feet, she's got bird wings. She has sex with demons and gives birth to all kinds of hideous demons and monsters. She becomes the first vampire. She would wait behind trees and nab people and suck their blood. She becomes the first kidnapper. She would wait around and steal people's children and make them into zombies. Any of the stories, any horror stories that you know, well, that it was already invented, and Lilith is the creator, is the first one of these. If any of you go and Google the name Lilith and then just look up images, you'll see what kind of very disgusting sexual images pop up. Because it's interesting that in today's world, Lilith no longer is the embodiment of evil, but she's almost become the patron saint of modern day third wave feminism. Way back, there was a concert series of women rockers called Lilith Fair. I think they've tried to resurrect it a few times, where Lilith becomes the embodiment of female power, the terrifying side of women, and but the ultimate example, of course, of a femme fatale. Some of you have been typing some other great examples of femme fatales, because, I mean, man, we could make a list that goes on forever. Here's another one, and that is in the Odyssey that we read. We have a very minor scene. I mean, it's incredibly minor, and that is the scene where Odysseus and his men go by the island of the Sirens. Now, this idea, for some reason, has captured artists' imaginations like almost no other part of the book. It really is a minor, irrelevant part of the story, and yet more pictures and more images have been devoted to this scene. In this image, which is a 19th century image, again, the pre-Raphaelites. I've been getting into the pre-Raphaelites lately. Maybe it's because of the Netscape series called Desperate Romantics about the pre-Raphaelites. And this is probably a more accurate picture of what the sirens are supposed to be like. Because typically we think today, in today's contemporary world, that sirens are like mermaids. But sirens in the Greek tradition are part woman and part bird. And they have lovely voices, and they will sing to you with this beautiful song. And the song, of course, will lure the sailors and their ships close to the island, and they will then devour you. Some of you are saying, I thought the harpies were the birds, and the harpies are often birds, but they're a different sort of thing than the sirens, and but they both actually are typically birds, although there are other traditions as well. I am a romantic. I prefer Draper's image here. This is from the 1890s, where the sirens are actually mermaids, and I don't know. I love mermaids. I wrote a mermaid novel called Song of the Merrows, which would be so bad of me to tell you that you could buy it online at Amazon, called The Song of the Merrows, which is a kind of a teen romance about mermaids. And if any of you saw not obviously the upcoming Pirates of the Caribbean, but the one before it, where they have sirens and they're mermaids, and this has become kind of the 20th century, even in 19th and 20th century idea of sirens. And I think partly because we find mermaids a little more seductive than bird women. I've always loved this picture. So right here, I'd like to jump over here, if I may, to the text itself. See if I can find it. I got it. Oh, where is it? It's the wonderful scene. See if I can find it. I had a wonderful text here. That is not it. Where that's what I get for putting away from it. Anyway, but I recommend that you read it. It's a wonderful passage where Odysseus is warned by Circe. This is another example of Circe doing him a good thing, saying, hey, beware of the Circe's island. Their song will entice you, and it will ultimately kill you, and they'll drive you to madness and kill you. So Odysseus has beeswax warmed up in his hand, and he sticks it in the ears of his men. And then he has himself bound to the mast, and then they row. And they can't hear the song because they have earwax in their, or beeswax in their ears, but he can. He's driven to madness. He's begging for them to unleash him, but he's already told them beforehand, if I do that, don't do it. Just tie my ropes tighter. And so he's the only mortal to have heard their beautiful song and to have survived. So wonderful, again, example of the femme fatale. Now, in Oedipus, it begins with the fact that the land, the city that they live in, is barren. The crops can't grow, the women can't have pregnant, pretty much just everything's gone dry. And Oedipus is their king. Now, Oedipus is not the guy you would imagine would be king. He's got his feet are kind of clubbed, the name Oedipus literally means swollen foot. And I'm not going to tell you why he's got that name, but it's a terrible reason why he has that name. And but he becomes king because when he shows up to the city, there is a sphinx. The sphinx is a woman, generally a woman, who's got the face of a woman, the wings of an eagle, and the body of a lion. And she's terrifying and beautiful. And she gives a riddle, and if the man can understand the riddle, then she will go away. And if the man cannot guess the riddle, then she kills him. So you're drawn in because you think you're going to get something really great, and she's beautiful. You get the riddle, you can't answer the riddle, then she kills you. But Oedipus is very clever. He's very brilliant. And he gets the riddle and he solves it, and she goes away. But now there is a plague, and the plague is again something that the entire play is based on. And I'm not going to tell you what the plague is, because I think that I want you to read it or watch it if you haven't. But to give you a little bit of a hint, a great atrocity has taken place in the city. The king before Oedipus was murdered, and his murder has yet to be to have justice. And what's worse, the queen is living in unimaginable sin, because the queen is living with her son, and the gods don't seem to approve of this very much. So the king had been murdered, and the queen sleeping with her son. And if that doesn't creep you out, I don't know what does. And it creeped out the Greeks too. That's why that story is a rather careful thing. She doesn't know she's married to her son, but she does know that she has killed her son. So she doesn't actually realize that Oedipus is her son. She thinks she solved it by killing her baby, which is what we're going to find out. Not to give away too much. I want to say something that the idea of the femme fatale is central to the whole oops. That was bad. I just dropped my whole thing on my... it'll come back up here. The femme fatale is central to the superhero universe, also the gaming universe, where we have incredibly sexy villains. These are some cosplayers at various Comic Cons. They're very enticing, very sexy, and of course very deadly. But notice that as well, they're not always evil. That many of the sexiest and most dangerous characters are also some of the superhero good guys. Someone like a Black Widow is quite good, but also you would not call her safe. Here are just a few. And notice how sexy they are. I mean, man, these are some serious sexy heroes. They look like the girls in Reese Hall at Union College. And so the femme fatale, that dangerous female, is not always in our myths evil. Sometimes it can actually be something that is dangerous but works for good. And I'm hoping most women here who are listening saying, well, that's me. I'm dangerous, but I'm working for good. And this is all very interesting. This would make a great paper later on. I mean, if you haven't started your paper, you still have till midnight tonight. That's a great one, but you'll have plenty of time, because we'll notice the femme fatale over and over again. You will begin to notice, just because we pointed it out, you will begin to notice the femme fatale in literature everywhere you go. whether it's a summer blockbuster film, whether it's a superhero comic, whether it is any sort of epic myth, whether it's the video game you're playing right now. There is almost always a femme fatale, usually more than one. So notice that. And this is, in particular, this is something we find in what we call masculine literature. Now, we do find that in feminine literature too, but we more often will find something quite different in feminine literature. When I was in graduate school, we talked a lot about this. What is the dominant trope for female or women for literature that's written and dominated by women? Because obviously the idea of the dangerous woman who's going to suck me in and ultimately be my demise doesn't have the same effect on women. What is the most dominant idea for women? Well, there are a number, and the most and probably the one that we run into the most is the untrustworthy hero. We have the sexy hero who we think is Prince Charming, who turns out to actually be not trustworthy, not what we thought he was. Remember, he turns out to be just after what we want. A good example would be in the movie Frozen, where you have a character who's a perfect example of that, where he seems like the ideal man, and in the end, he's actually just after the kingdom. This is an idea that will pop up over and over again. It will pop up in almost every single Lifetime movie. Will pop into almost every Jane Austen story, every Charlotte Bronte story, every chick flick. There's one. There's a Gaston kind of a character. A character who is very sexy, seems to actually have everything you would ever want. As a matter of fact, he actually seems to be your dream come true, and yet turns out to be the very antithesis of what you want. So that would be something that would be fun to write about. Jumping from the Odyssey to Oedipus, I want to talk about something that the Greeks were very conscious about, and that is two very specific heroes. The first one we've spent already enough time, I think, talking about, and that is the Homeric hero. The Homeric hero is the one like the one we see to the left, the one who is brave. He's got kleos. He's got honor. He's the warrior. He's the kind of character that if Dwayne Johnson, The Rock, is going to play, it's going to be a Homeric hero. If Arnold Schwarzenegger is going to play it, it's going to be the Homeric hero, where he's strong, he's got a gentle side, yes, but he's ultimately going to win the day. I agree with that. Look at that. He's not very good at wearing his helmets, and he's not very good at wearing other parts of his armor too, which will get him into trouble. Part of his arrogance. This is a hero that almost seems invincible. This is a hero that is not unlike many of our superheroes. Like Superman would be a Homeric hero. Very powerful. He's kind of a warrior. He's fighting for good. He's fighting for honor. He's fighting for truth, justice, the American way. And he's good. And it's easy to root for the Homeric hero. And when he falls, it's a tragedy. And indeed, as Melody points out, Homeric heroes are often boring or too perfect, which is why, in some ways, the Homeric hero is not the favorite hero of the Greeks, and is rapidly becoming the less favorite hero even among movie viewers of today. Instead, what the Greeks preferred was the alternative to the Homeric hero, which is something that we call the Promethean hero. Now, some of you may be familiar with the term Prometheus just because there's a an alien film that came out called Prometheus, and now a sequel. But Prometheus is a very significant, important figure in Greek mythology. You see, in Greek mythology, there was a point where the gods had all power, and humans were essentially nothing more than the animals. We had really nothing over the animals. We kind of lived like animals. We ravaged for our food just like the animals. We just were basically one of the smarter animals. But Prometheus, who is a demigod, felt for the humans because he felt that they had potential, that they were different than the animals, that there was a potential there if they could just get a leg up, if they could be given something that would, give them an advantage that their intelligence could then grow on. And he realized that the biggest difference between the gods and all that they had and the humans who had nothing was fire. And if humans could have fire, then they could build things, they could build weapons because they would be able to have blacksmithing and tinsmithing. They would be able to build roads and better houses. They would be able to warm themselves at night. They would be able to cook and hunt and actually cook the food that they find. They would be able to preserve the food that they would catch by smoking it. They would, in many ways, become equal to the gods because they would have power, because they would have fire. And fire ultimately would become the means of machines even. One thinks of the Jungle Book and King Louie, where he sings that song, ooh, 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 I want to be like you, ooh, ooh. I want to walk like you, talk like you, ooh, ooh, ooh. And why does he want the fire? Because he thinks that if he has the fire, then he would be able to advance and become equal to the humans. So Prometheus does something very diabolical, but it was very useful to the humans. He steals fire from Mount Olympus. It's never clear how he does it, but in some of the best images, you have a picture of him with a torch of fire, and he's sneaking down Mount Olympus, and he brings it to the humans. And once one human has it, it spreads to another human. And next thing you know, you almost have pictures of campfires spreading everywhere. And there's a point of no return. There's no going back because it's like the internet. Once something's out on the internet, you can't take it back. And once everyone has fire, there's no going back. And well, the humans were grateful to Prometheus because he instantaneously improved the quality of their lives and allowed them to become equal to the gods in so many levels. However, the gods were pissed off. They were really angry because this really took away some of their edge. I mean, the gods still had the edge in that they were immortal and the humans were mortal. However, other than that, there wasn't a whole lot of advantage. So the gods decided to punish Prometheus in the worst possible way. So they chained him to a rock. And here's the picture of it here. And get back to it. So they chain him to a rock. And every day, I'll get a closer picture. Every day, and this is the great Renaissance painter Rembrandt's picture. Every day, the eagles would come and eat his liver. And must have had a big liver, and it would just devour his liver. It would be very painful. Then at the end of the day, during the night, miraculously, his liver would grow back so that the next day, here comes the bird again who eats his liver. And then the next day, the same thing happens. So every single day, and I assume that somewhere on a rock, somewhere on planet Earth, he's still chained to a rock, and there is a bird nibbling at his liver for punishment for bringing us fire. Now, the Greeks loved this idea, loved it. And the idea of the Promethean hero, the hero who is not grandiose like an Achilles or an Odysseus, but rather one who sacrificed himself and his own good for the well-being of his city-state, his nation, humanity. I'm going to argue that for many Greeks, when they watched or studied or knew the story of Oedipus, they would be more moved, perhaps by Oedipus, than they would by Odysseus or Achilles. Because while they fought for their own glory, Oedipus continues to seek truth, ultimately to lift the plague that will benefit everyone, even after he realizes that he is the one that's ultimately going to be the one who suffers. And I agree with Melody that Tantalus had it worse. And I think you do spell it right. I encourage everyone, if you read the story of Tantalus, gods are not kind. And some of you have written good ones. Faith has written a nice paper about comparing the gods of the Greeks and the God of Judaism and Christianity. Now, one of the things that is crucial and is that jumping now to Oedipus. Oedipus Rex, or Rex is just Latin for the king. Oedipus the king. This is a story that was, like all drama in the Greek time period, was a contest. Now, the Greeks loved contests. And almost every Greek play that you ever see and survives because it was part of a contest. And if there was going to be an annual celebration to one of the gods or goddesses, there would often be some games, such as the Olympic Games, which would happen every 4 years in tribute to Zeus. But if there were ever any festivities to the gods, there would also be games for playwrights and actors, and there would be judges. And so the great playwrights would write plays, they would be performed, and then judges would decide which one is the best. Oedipus Rex is considered by a lot of literary critics, if not the vast majority of literary critics, to be the single most important, the single greatest, and the single most influential play of the ancient world. So that means it's pretty darn important. But when it played, it only came in second place. So you ask, well, which one came in first place? I mean, if Oedipus is considered one of the greatest plays ever, I would argue it's the greatest play until one of Shakespeare's plays, maybe even until Hamlet. What was better? I'd like to see this. Well, that play is lost. We have no idea what it was. But it wasn't because they thought the other play was a better play. But Oedipus, as a play, offended the Greeks. Offended them terribly. It offended them because it attempted to do something that the Greeks don't like. See, the Greeks believe absolutely in fate. Now, last week we talked about what happens if you have a very pessimistic view of the afterlife. Well, one of the things that inevitably happens when you have a very pessimistic view of the afterlife is you can be discouraged when you look out and you see that life is not fair. Because you'll notice that some people even though they're terrible people, seem to get all the breaks. They get all the money, they get all the chicks, or they get all the cars. You know what I'm talking about. They just seem to get everything. And then you have some other people who are good people who really set out to do right. And it just seems like tragedy strikes them one after the other. It's just like they can never get a good break. I don't know if you know people like that. I do. I know people like both of those. Boyd reminds me of the Mark Twain stories of the little boy and the bad little boy and the good little boy, and that is worth reading. It's a wonderful story, a mockery of later on what we would think of as Uncle Arthur's stories. But they notice that bad things happen to good people and good things happen to bad people, and that doesn't seem fair. And if the afterlife is not particularly exciting, how do we explain this? And they explain it with fate. Now, the Greeks strongly believe in fate. Fate is in everything. But fate is not the same as fatalism. Let me explain. Fate is the belief that there are outside forces at work affecting my outcome. Okay? So I want to say that again because I want you to be really clear on it. Fate is the belief that there are outside forces at work affecting my outcome and the outcomes of others. Now, Christians don't like to say they believe in fate because we think that sounds a little bit like a puppet master. But I think Christians believe in an outside force that affects our outcome. Absolutely. I think we actually believe in a number of outside forces that affect our outcome. So because we don't like to call it fate, we have another word for it, and that's providence. Providence and fate are synonymous. They're exactly the same. When we say I believe in providence, what we mean is I believe that there is an outside force that is working to affect my outcome. Okay, does that make sense? Fatalism is different, and you're catching on here, Melody. Fatalism is the belief that there are outside forces that control the outcome, that dictate the outcome. The Greeks, despite the reputation, do not believe this. The Greeks believe that yes, there may be gods at work affecting my outcome. I may have good forces and bad forces at work. Ultimately, it is my own decisions, it is my own flaws, it is my own good that causes whatever happens in the end. That's fate. But they don't believe, and they're very offended by the idea, that there are forces at work that completely dictate my outcome. That is not fate. That's what's called fatalism. Oedipus Rex came in second place because the judges believed it was a play that was about fatalism and not fate. Now, that's a question I'm going to ask in a lecture question. I want you to answer honestly. I'm going to tell you right now that Sophocles argued to the day he died, and he lived to be into his 90s, that this was not a play about fatalism, that everything bad that happens to Oedipus, that everything bad that happens to Jocasta, that everything bad that happens, period, is all because of the weakness of Oedipus himself or Jocasta himself or the people themselves. Apollo doesn't make it happen. He's not dictating that it happens. He only predicts that it happens. Yes, indeed, as Faith mentions, the Greeks have the three fates, which is a little bit different than the concept of fate. Now, the fates are the ones that control the strand of life, if you will. And so, yes, there is a divine appointment with our death. And that's essentially what that is. But that's not the same thing as saying that the outcome of my life, whether it's a good one or a bad one. So yes, indeed, they did believe that there is a kind of force at work that ultimately will bring about my death and everyone must die. But it's still up to me to live I can still have a good life. I can still have a life of honor. The gods don't make me a bad person. I make me a bad person. The gods don't make me a good person. I make me a good person. Is that so different from really what Christians believe? I'm not so sure it's that different. It's a little, and I know it seems like it seems like we're walking a very slim line here, but it was enough of a line that the audience and judges who first saw Oedipus felt that Sophocles had crossed it, that Oedipus had no choice in the matter. He was doomed. He was completely doomed to marry his mother and kill his father. And that Apollo made it happen by predicting it. And Sophocles will argue, no, Apollo simply predicts it, but it's not the same thing. So, and it's true, as Mark says, it's kind of a fine line depending on the amount of influence. Because isn't it true, as we look at this play, and I'm expecting that you will have this play either read or watched by Wednesday. But it is true that the predictions that Apollo makes about what will happen seem to manage to affect everybody to do the exact thing that has to be done to make it come true. However, he doesn't make them do the thing. It's not Apollo that gives Oedipus his anger. It's not Apollo who gives Oedipus his ambition. It's not Apollo who makes Jocasta and Laius do something horrific with their baby, what they think is killing it, when they could have perhaps done something else. So here's this is what I'm going to ask of you, very, very, very important, for Wednesday. Okay, by tonight, you'll have your paper, and that's really, really important. I expect, I really, really mean this, that everybody will have read Oedipus, or just as good, you sat down and watched the film. Okay? And it's right there on Google Classroom. All you have to do is sit down and watch it. It takes about 5 or 10 minutes, but you will lock into it if you give it time. Sure, it's not quite like a summer blockbuster film, but I think you will like it, and I think you'll find it fascinating watching it happen. It's not a complicated story, but it is a kind of crime-solving story. Who killed the king? And so, does that make sense? Does anyone have questions of what I've been saying? I've been talking now for almost 45 minutes. Any questions? No? I will take that as you are stunned in silence at the thought of that. Real quick, I want to jump back to something that Mark reminded me to tell everybody, and that's the difference between the traditional view of heaven and perhaps the Roman version of heaven. It's going to be the Romans who take the Greeks' idea of the afterlife They're going to find it just unpalatable. They can't bear the thought of there not being a reward for a good life. If somebody has lived a good life, they should have a nice place to live. They should eat well and have a happy place and trees and forests. And if someone's lived a terrible life, then they should be in Tartarus, where it's terrible and there's even torture, and they should be punished for their sin. This is an idea where they ultimately will develop tiers of heaven and even ultimately a purgatory, which will also show up in the Apocrypha, and also then in we'll find it in especially in the medieval Roman Catholicism. I think that this causes a kind of problem and really is central to what will become the Protestant Reformation, because the idea that there are levels of hell means that there are levels of sin. And the idea that there are levels of heaven leads one to believe that there are levels of good, that some good is more good than other good. And well, this causes a lot of theological problems. More importantly, this causes a lot of, let's just say, behavioral problems. And I think that it's time. I think that it in Christianity it's become a kind of dangerous idea, because where we have tried to make a model of heaven and hell and seen it as having various levels of achievement or punishment, what we do in that, what I think we're doing is something that God is over and over again. He speaks probably as harsh as anything. We have made ourselves the judge. Instead, he over and over again says that this is a mystery of what's coming up next, and I'm not going to tell you what's going to happen, really. It's going to remain a mystery, but we decide, but we're going to go ahead and make up our own stuff, and we're going to put people in it and imagine people in it. So it's our own way of judging. We love to judge, and it makes our own. And the reason why we like to do that is it makes our own hearts feel better, because I may be bad, but at least I'm not as bad as that person. Or I may be going to hell, but I'm not going to the worst part of hell like that person. Or I may be going to heaven, but my heaven's going to be better than that person. So, or I may not be in the good heaven like him, but I'm still going to be in heaven. To me, that's a dangerous way to go, and misses the whole point. And Martin Luther will rebel against this entire idea, saying, well, we've missed the whole point of the grace and faith in Jesus, and turned it into a works. So I think there's a kind of danger in that. Anyway, all of which would make a great paper. I'm going to go ahead and stick around for another 5 minutes, but if you're done, if you feel like you're feeling good about your paper that's coming up, or feel good about what we're doing, then you have a great day. Stay tuned for some questions and things like that. Thank you to Mark, who's been helping us post these. I'll stick around if anyone has any questions. I know some especially have questions about the paper. And thank you, Melody, because it does affect how people treat each other today, because some sins are more acceptable than others. And I think that's true. I think sometimes it makes it easy for us to point the finger at others, because we think that our sins are not as bad as their sins. And they are. Anyway, so thank you. I hope you have a great day. So you may go and enjoy the evening. I'll look forward to your papers. Stick around for an extra 5 minutes if anyone has any questions. Any questions? Thank you, everybody. If you get, it's not, someone thought it was due at noon, but it's not due at noon, but I will get I will get feedback to you, I promise, as much as I can. And I'm not a stickler about that midnight. I would like to get it, though, certainly by the morning. I will say that. All right. You don't have to submit for feedback. No, that's absolutely not. That was entirely if you think it would be useful just to say, hey, am I on the right track? So. Oh, absolutely, Faith. Email me questions. I would love that. Yeah, just mike.menard@ucollege.edu would be the best. And email me any questions or text me questions. Absolutely. I'll do my best.
Oh, I guess we can. Hey, what was the word count again? I forgot.
I didn't give an exact word count, but I would say about 500 to 750 words.
Okay. Whoops. I'm
Not very long.
800. Sorry.
Oh, all the better. I totally don't mind. If it's 1,000, I don't care.
Okay.
Oh, okay. We'll put in a 15,000 word essay. We're gonna write you a book.
No. If you've written more, I totally don't mind.
Okay.
Totally don't mind. So even if it's like 2,000 words, and if it's good, I'm happy.
Oh.
Thank you.
All right.
I also wrote a Korean mythology, and is that fine? Just like writing a bit of summary kind of stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. Give me some sources, perhaps, because I may be interested and want to look those up myself.